Thousands protest outside Downing Street and around the country against Donald Trump's travel ban and Theresa May's handling of it. We learned that she was told about the ban before she left Washington.
I may say that the approach taken by the party opposite, pointlessly to demonise the Trump administration, would have achieved the very opposite.
Good evening from Westminster. In the last hour, thousands of people have gathered on Whitehall across the road from Downing Street to protest against Trump's temporary ban on immigrants from 7 predominantly Muslim countries. In the House of Commons, the Foreign Secretary tried to reassure MPs that the ban excluded British nationals like Sir Mo Farah wherever they were born and whatever their second passport. So Britain may have secured an exemption from the ban, but not from the moral outrage echoing around the world. This programme has been told that Theresa May was briefed about the ban on refugees during her White House visit. So why did it take her 2 days to express any unease at the biggest challenge to accepted international policies in a generation?
Why on earth has Theresa the Appeaser got him here within a few months?
Trump talks of the bad dudes who would have slipped into America if he had warned of his decision to move against Muslims from 7 specified countries. And the latest poll is suggesting in America that people living in the heartlands support what he has done. Washington, however, is deeply divided, with a number of Republicans and many Democrats furious about Trump's latest moves. And the victims of the policy are speaking out.
She was in the airport and they flew her all the way from Abu Dhabi. And they didn't let her pass.
Canada is tonight reeling from the assault on a Quebec mosque in which 6 worshippers were shot dead. 1 suspect has been arrested. And here we talk to the pop star Jamelia and her daughter, who, travelling first class on a British train, were challenged by a white passenger as to whether they had first-class tickets. A sign of our own unsettled times?
Welcome to a chilly Westminster, where MPs are now debating an emergency motion on President Trump's travel ban. The Commons Speaker, John Bercow, approved the debate after the Foreign Secretary had spent 90 minutes facing mostly hostile questions from MPs, including how much the Prime Minister knew about the planned ban during her visit to Washington last week. This programme has learned that she was briefed at the White House that an announcement was being prepared. It comes as thousands of people have gathered in Whitehall for a protest against the ban. We'll be hearing live from there in a moment. But first, this from our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Tonight, cries of protest floated across Whitehall to Downing Street. Theresa May wasn't at home to hear them. She's been travelling around the British Isles while a political storm blows over what her critics say has been a muted and belated response to President Trump's travel ban on Muslim countries. By the time Theresa May arrived in Cardiff this morning, an online petition calling for President Trump's state visit to be dropped had topped 1 million. The Prime Minister was in Wales to discuss Brexit plans with leaders of the devolved administrations. 2 of them took the opportunity to attack President Trump's new immigration policy and said it put a question mark over the idea of a state visit.
I think it would be inappropriate for the state visit to go ahead while the bans on immigrants from certain countries and the ban on refugees remain in place.
It's very difficult to see it being a success. I think it's very difficult to see it going ahead. I think great thought has to be given to the timing of the visit, and at this moment in time, the timing couldn't be worse.
By the time Theresa May left Cardiff, heading for talks in Dublin, the online petition was gaining strength. The spokesman said the government had got clarification that dual nationals wouldn't be banned from the US if one of their passports was British. But the official online US government advice still said they would be banned. Boris Johnson promised more clarification later in the afternoon.
In the House of Commons. Okay. That's the place. House of Commons. Be there.
In the time it took Mrs May to fly to Dublin, another 80,000 had signed the Ban Trump petition. She greeted Ireland's Prime Minister Enda Kenny, who has a growing online petition telling him not to make a St Patrick's Day visit to Washington. Boris Johnson then told MPs that thanks to the special relationship nurtured by Theresa May last week in Washington, the UK had now extracted a special carve-out all UK passport holders could go to the USA, even if their other passport was from one of the 7 banned nations. People, the Foreign Secretary said, had misjudged the new president.
Anybody looking at the president's electoral rhetoric and what he is in fact doing, any reasonable person would conclude that his bark is considerably worse than his bite.
Channel 4 News has learned that President Trump's team warned Theresa May's team during their visit to the White House that he was about to sign an executive order on travel restrictions. Not all details of the policy were shared, but the ban on refugees was.
I wonder if the Foreign Secretary can comment on the blog currently that has just come up on from Gary Gibbon at Channel 4 that states that the Prime Minister, was told of the US refugee ban was coming prior to the signing of the executive order. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm or deny that fact?
I don't comment on confidential conversations between the Prime Minister and... I don't comment on confidential conversations between the Prime Minister and the US President. But what I can tell the House is that as soon as we had a full understanding of the measure that they had brought in, we decided to intercede to get the protections that we needed.
When it comes to human rights, when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to torture and the treatment of minorities, President Trump is already descending down a very dangerous slope. And when that happens, we need a Prime Minister who is prepared to tell him to stop, not one who simply proffers her hand and silently helps him along.
Opposition MPs queued up to attack President Trump and to question his unusually quick invitation to a state visit.
Why on earth has Teresa the Appeaser got him here within a few months?
2 fascist dictators, Mussolini and Hitler, were raining bombs on towns and cities in Britain. Now this government's hand in hand with another fascist, Trump. And what I say to him, do the decent thing and ban the visit.
The Foreign Secretary said demonising the President would damage British influence. In Dublin, the Prime Minister has just told a press conference the visit will go ahead.
I have issued that invitation, informally issued that invitation for a state visit for President Trump here to the United Kingdom, and that invitation stands.
The prize of being first through the Oval Office door has quickly brought a backlash, and there's every chance it's not the last.
And Gary is with me now. So, Gary, that old question once again, what did she know? When did she know it?
I think Theresa May and her team were told in the White House that there was going to be a ban on refugees as part of the shift in American policy, and that it would be coming very quickly. I don't, as far as I can understand, get the impression they were given all the other details of the policy, but they were nonetheless given enough. And warning lights should have been flashing that they would have to respond to this, and if there was going to be a critical response, come up with a critical response. That didn't happen. Why not? Well, with Theresa May, she quite often, when she's had a lot of time to prepare for a speech or a public utterance, she paints in very bold colours. When she's ambushed slightly, it's a very sort of straight-back, low-key answer, and I think we saw a bit of that in Turkey when she first responded.
And what is the cost for her, long-term and short-term?
I think her team are all too aware that there were risks attached to this trip. A lot of effort went into the choreography trying to make sure nothing did go wrong, but there was always the chance that there would be something like this, an executive order that embarrassed them. And then there's this other thing, the hands that clutch each other. And one person close to her said that really was unfortunate. We know that that will be revisited again and again whenever Donald Trump upsets a section of the British population, which you can be fairly sure he will.
And what about the Queen, Her Majesty? She must be rather vexed by all this. One can imagine, although of course there's been no comment from her.
The idea of a state visit being something that is controversial isn't entirely new. I mean, when the President of China came here, that puts Her Majesty quite close to controversy. This really would not go down well, you suspect, with the palace, because you've got a great big long run up to this thing. You've then got to work out the logistics of the trip. How do you make sure that Donald Trump, I spoke to one of the people in his administration last week, who said he's not going to want to see people booing him. This guy is very thin-skinned. You're going to have to work out some logistics that maybe keep him away from pavements a bit.
Or could they move it to Balmoral? I mean,
well, there's been speculation that he might play the golf course there, and that would certainly keep him out of harm's way in terms of meeting the public. The idea of addressing both houses of Parliament has been talked about, and that's been broached with his team. But I understand from one person who's in his administration that they see some problems with that in terms of him not being entirely comfortable with these great sort of rhetorical moments. But also, I'd have thought, after listening to the Commons today, there could be a walkout, if not a protest in there.
And just briefly, Gary, I mean, the 1.5 million signatures almost on this petition, and where the petition was signed corresponds more or less with the areas of the country where people voted to stay in the European Union.
There's an extraordinary crossover in our very divided nation, and that's the sort of thing that I imagine would be giving them heebie-jeebies in Buckingham Palace.
Gary, thank you very much. And let's just go to these pictures of the demonstration in Cardiff. There we go. We've got the one down the road, but this one is actually in Cardiff. I'm not quite sure how big the crowd is. It looks like several hundred to me, perhaps even bigger. Some people have said thousands. I certainly saw thousands of people down the road on Whitehall, many of them holding banners, not all of them flattering towards Theresa May, and certainly not flattering of Donald Trump. But let's go to our two guests. Roshanar Ali of the Labour Party, Jacob Rees-Mogg of the Tory Party. Thanks very much for coming out in the cold. Jacob Rees-Mogg, let me start with you. I mean, if one could kind of rewind history, would you say that issuing this most powerful invitation, the state banquet, the state visit to the UK, this is what Donald Trump really always wanted, was this a mistake? Should they have just not done this? Did they rush into it?
To invite our closest ally, democratically elected, supported by the American people, to come on a state visit is a completely sensible and routine thing to do. Labour governments invited Ceausescu and Putin on state visits. We are inviting the leader of the free world. It is a very sensible thing to do, and the reddest of red carpets should be rolled out when he comes.
But within 8 days of taking office? I mean, he's been in office for a week.
He's the American president. The speed of Mrs. May's visit and of this offer shows how close we are to America, a very long-standing ally, a country that has supported us on many occasions, and we them. We have the friendliest relations with them, and it's a proper democracy. All these comparisons that we've had with dictators and so on are absurd. That Mr. Trump is democratically elected. He is the leader of the free world. It is sensible to invite him, and it's in the British national interest.
But the Prime Minister must have known the trouble was coming down the line. I mean, the last time he said the things that he's now actually doing, there was a petition signed by 500,000 people. They knew this was in the air, and now we've been told by Gary Gibbon that actually they were told about it.
The Prime Minister had a brilliant success on her visit to Washington. She achieved Trump's support for NATO, which he had been wobbly on in the campaign.
But can we trust him on that?
That is essential to the security of our nation and to the security of Europe. And it is Mrs. May's achievement, and we can all sleep more soundly in our beds because of her.
And if this was such a resounding success for Downing Street, why the uncomfortable 2-day wait before a decent response?
Well, the Prime Minister likes to consider things. All you press and media...
2 days?
The Prime Minister has to think things through and come out with reasoned views. The Prime Minister is not a commentator there to jump through hoops for the media. She is there to say what is right in the British national interest, and deliberation is a sign of strength.
Roshanar Ali, 56% of Americans polled today agree with this travel ban. The parts of the country that have signed this petition are the parts of the country that voted to stay in Europe. And we're seeing basically Brexit politics by other means, aren't we?
Well, people are deeply concerned. This decision by Donald Trump will alienate hundreds of millions of Muslims across the world. Many of those countries are our allies, and it's sending shockwaves across Europe among European Muslim communities and anyone who cares about rights and human rights and protecting minorities. So this is deeply disturbing. The second thing is that the Queen, as the head of state, is also the head of the Commonwealth. We have to protect the reputation of our country, and that's why it's so concerning that Theresa May, as our Prime Minister, has not been able to respond immediately, and it turns out she knew about this announcement.
And what's your reaction to that?
Well, I feel, as a Muslim in Britain, having experienced Islamophobia all through my life, and many Muslims experience it, I feel let down by our Prime Minister. I feel deeply saddened that she couldn't take a stand with our closest ally as a critical friend to say, this is not our way, this is not the American way, nor the British way, and try and influence this response, because it's deeply dangerous and deeply divisive.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, this is about values of decency, isn't it? This is about fundamental human decency. Banning refugees, banning an entire religion, albeit temporarily, is not the right way to behave.
I'm not here to defend the executive orders of Mr. Trump, but what Mrs. May achieved in Washington by private discussions was the president doing a U-turn on torture and backing his defense secretary and backing NATO. Private conversations with other friendly heads of state are a much better way of doing it than jumping up and down in a fit of pique. That is not the way the British government should behave, and I think Mrs. May has got it absolutely right.
Roshanara Ali, is it not the fact that we are where we are after the 23rd of June and we have to cozy up to the Americans whether we like it or not? They're our only kind of firm friends at the moment. We are left with no choice on this one.
We don't have to be sycophantic. We have to stand up for our values. These are also American values. These are universal values of tolerance, of inclusion, of mutual understanding and respect. And that is not what we're seeing. And all I ask is for our Prime Minister to show courage and leadership. People compare her to Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher did occasionally stand up to the American president. It's time that Theresa May stood up and took a stand for the right kind of values, the values that we're all proud of as Brits and also as Americans.
And isn't that the point, Jacob? She could have held back on the state visit. This is the biggest prize that we can offer to an American president.
Where were the complaints when Barack Obama banned Iraqi refugees for 6 months and when Jimmy Carter banned Iranians altogether? That when it was done by Democrat
presidents... He banned Iranians after the...
all Iranians, but not all Iranians supported Ayatollahs. He banned all Iranians.
This was after 450 American diplomats were held hostage in the American embassy for a year.
He banned all Iranians in exactly the same way as Trump has banned people from 7 nations. Trump has done it on a bigger scale, but it's the same principle. The American government...
He didn't ban refugees from the Arab world.
Obama banned refugees from Iraq, including a translator for the American government who later got killed. So when Obama did this, nobody minded. It's this Trumpophobia that I think has got completely out of hand. And of course we invite American presidents on state visits. The Queen is a wonderful source of soft power for this country.
Do you think she's happy about this tonight?
The Queen is always happy because it's her constitutional duty to be happy, and the Queen always does her duty. May she live forever.
Well, Shana, I mean, this is what is the way ahead here? We cannot uninvite the President of the United States. He's going to come to this country whether we like it or not, and at the end of the day, we need him on our side whether we like it or not.
Yes, and it could be an official visit, not with the status of the state visit, because that damages our reputation in the world. And we need allies, not just as the Americans, but other allies. And we also need to protect the standing of the monarch, which this visit doesn't do as a state visit.
Okay.
The Queen's standing is above any single visit by far.
Okay. We've got to leave it there. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Roshanara Ali, thank you very much indeed. And I think we now go to our reporter Fatima Manji, who is amongst the protesters a little further down the road here on Whitehall. Fatima.
Hi Matt, yes, the gates of Downing Street are just behind me, but you probably can't see them because this whole area is absolutely covered with protesters. Difficult to say on numbers, but absolutely thousands. We know from the cenotaph to the right to the stage on the left, there are absolutely loads of people. And there have been a number of speakers speaking out against Mr. Trump and against Mrs. May's so-called appeasement of Mr. Trump. Spontaneous cries of "Dump Trump," "Refugees are welcome here," calling for no state visit. They are absolutely clear that they do not want Mr. Trump to come here. They do not want the Queen to meet Mr. Trump, and they want Theresa May to take a much firmer stance against Mr. Trump's current policy. Now, what's interesting is, although there are lots of seasoned protesters here, I've met union members and the kinds of people who often go to protest, there are also lots of people who don't go to protest, people who haven't protested before, people who are quite young, older people, a real range of people who have come here to say that they want to speak out against what's happening in the US, to stand in solidarity against this Muslim ban, and to send a message to our Prime Minister, to the gates of Downing Street, that she needs to be doing more to speak against Donald Trump. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Fatima. Well, back in Washington, the President is standing firm on his travel ban. For more on that and the rest of the day's news, let's go to John in the studio. John.
Thank you, Matt. A new poll has revealed that the majority of US voters support President Trump's ban on refugees and visitors from those 7 predominantly... I'm sorry, you can't hear me because my microphone's fallen off. A rare event. Just a second. Here it is. There we are. No, it's perfectly good. predominantly Muslim countries. It came as President Trump defended his decision to launch immediate action, tweeting that if he'd given a week's notice, a lot of bad dudes were rushed into the country. Our correspondent Kylie Morris is in Washington. Kylie.
John, a challenging day all round, really. President Trump has played a big populist card, I think, with this executive order and tried to remind people today that regardless of this wave of protest at the weekend, this was one of the big hits of his campaign and he's doing what he said he would. Perhaps recognizing that even many Republicans who at the time criticized a Muslim ban when it came up during the campaign has stayed silent in response to this presidential order. The Democrats on Capitol Hill are seeking to overturn this legislatively. Civil rights groups are working in the courts, and certainly the chaotic way in which this order was carried out has created some legal loopholes potentially. But remember, this is Donald Trump. He thrives on chaos, and today he's insisting that with these orders, he's made America safer.
We actually had a very good day yesterday in terms of Homeland Security.
It might not have seemed so peeking out the White House window, where there were mass protests on the president's doorstep. The outrage reverberated from New York to Albuquerque, Charlotte to Chicago. Demonstrators furious that America is now not open to refugees, and more than 218 million citizens from 7 Muslim-majority countries are no longer welcome.
Isolating ourselves and being more nationalistic, for me, these are stepping stones. These are first steps to a dangerous era, a dangerous time that the world has seen before.
I've always been a patriot. My whole family is in the military. It's hard for me to be proud of my country right now.
But amidst the swirling opposition, voices of support for the ban cut through at a town hall meeting in Wisconsin.
There are many Syrian immigrants that we have cause to suspect of being radical Islamic terrorist sympathizers. And so I think we need, and first and foremost, is to keep our country safe.
President Trump has been very adamant in saying that the safety and security of the American people shall not be compromised, period. And I agree with that.
Protection of the nation from foreign terrorist entry.
A poll released today indicates that 57% of American voters favour a temporary ban on refugees and citizens from those 7 countries until the US is confident in its ability to screen out potential terrorists. But even some in favour of the ban have criticised the confusion it's caused. Drafted by Team Trump, key government departments didn't know of its provisions until the order was signed. But it's not Donald Trump's fault, according to him. In a rant over breakfast, he blamed airport problems on a Delta airline computer outage, the protesters themselves, and the tears of Chuck Schumer, the Senate minority leader, who wept at a demonstration yesterday. This ban, the president wrote, was a big part of my campaign, explaining no notice was given of the order to prevent all the bad dudes from rushing in. On Capitol Hill, Senators John McCain, Lindsey Graham and a handful of other Republicans have warned, though, that the bad dudes will do very nicely out of the ban, asserting it will provide ISIS unending propaganda opportunities.
Mark Fields, President and CEO of Ford Motor Company.
In the world of business, the CEO of Ford, who met with President Trump on his first working day a week ago, has signed a statement that the policy goes against the company's values of diversity and respect for all people. Rinse and repeat from Goldman Sachs, the Wall Street giant, and a nucleus of tech companies, including Google and Twitter. Starbucks has promised to hire 10,000 refugees over the next 5 years. There's a backlash boycott and a backlash surge in support. In this new America, the bonfire politics of this businessman president means there's no sitting on the fence.
Well, now, the announcement that the ban would take immediate effect and the lack of any clarity about its exact terms led to confusion and protests at airports across America over the weekend. Chicago's O'Hare International Airport was one of several where travellers were detained as they sought to enter the country. Legal challenges were quickly launched and protests have continued into today. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is in Chicago and has this report.
Some were here because they'll protest against anything President Trump does. But for others, it was personal.
Yesterday, my aunt wasn't let in to border control, so I'm fighting for her rights, and I'm fighting for every right. I'm fighting
What
for the rights of
nationality
everybody.
is your aunt?
She's Syrian, and they didn't let her in.
Why didn't they let her in? What did they tell you?
She has a Syrian passport, until they made her cancel her visa, and they wouldn't let her pass. She was in the airport, and they flew her all the way from Abu Dhabi, and they didn't let her pass.
Several people with valid visas were held at immigration at O'Hare over the weekend. The Ulayat sisters' aunt has lived in Saudi Arabia for 30 years. She was coming to visit a sick relative.
My grandmother is battling cancer, and she came here for simply a week to see her, and they wouldn't even let her in to see my grandma. She had a valid visa.
Chicago, like all of America, was built on immigration. Jewish protesters came to defend Muslims. Their ancestors fled pogroms in Eastern Europe.
I'm here because my grandmother was a refugee, and she was brought into this country so my family can have a better life, and all refugees should be allowed to come in.
It's a pretty big protest for a cold night like this. But even so, even though these demonstrations are happening in airports across the country, what's really going to make a difference is the legal complaints that are being made against the government. That's going to be tested in courts up the land, maybe even the Supreme Court in the end. Inside the airport, about 150 volunteer lawyers were on hand to advise families waiting for relatives from the 7 countries affected.
Clearly, we're going to have a ton of people who are being stopped from boarding.
But advice is difficult, as judges have already overturned some aspects of the executive orders, and several individual cases are pending.
We have attorneys that are set up for all week long that are going to be coming here in 6-hour shifts. And I know that protesters aren't going to let up either. And we're just hoping that our congressional representatives can make whatever difference they can in Congress.
Emil Altamirano, 1 month old, half Iranian, half Nicaraguan, all American. His mother had hoped that her mother would come from Tehran to look after the baby, so she can return to her job as a doctor in a Chicago hospital.
She doesn't even want to immigrate to U.S. She just wants to visit the grandchild and go back home to Iran. But right now she's not allowed. I was hoping that she would be here for my delivery, helping me with my newborn. I don't have any family here. I'm a physician myself by the side. I'm on work visa here. So if I go out of the country, I have to apply for visa again. So that will be a problem for me, just because of my country.
Chicago has a rapidly growing immigrant population. Some refugees, but more business people, students, workers, professionals. The new policy is supposed to prevent terrorism, but the impact is on individual lives, turned upside down at the stroke of a president's pen.
Lindsay Hilsum in Chicago. Now, the White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer has just been giving a briefing. Right there, we return to Kylie Morris. Kylie, what's he said?
Well, John, to take up Lindsay's point, he is insisting that this move, this immigration ban, will in fact defend America from terrorism. Of course, the evidence is that there are none of the 9/11 terrorists, for example, that came from these 7 countries, that no refugee has actually committed an act of terrorism in the US since 1980. So despite that, certainly the White House spokesman is insisting that this is a necessary measure and it will achieve what it's intended to.
The president's going to be very proactive with protecting this country. We're not going to wait till we get attacked and figure out how we can make sure it doesn't happen again. He's going to do everything in his power to stop every threat that we face in this country and every potential threat. And that's the key point in this. How do we get ahead of threats? How do we keep America ahead of the curve when it comes to people who want to do us harm?
Well, even while the world is coming to terms with this ban, Kylie, there's another announcement on the way. What is it?
This is the Trumpian way, certainly. The velocity of these orders is just extraordinary. The latest we're hearing is that tomorrow night, Donald Trump will have an announcement on who the next Supreme Court justice will be. Now, this is a really vital decision. Many people in the election cast their vote according to who they wanted to choose the new Supreme Court justice. It will affect Americans' lives on a very kind of fundamental basis, and so there'll be a lot of interest in that. But I think that the speed of these orders means that important things are slipping under the wire. For example, Steve Bannon,
who is the former Breitbart chief, who is now Donald Trump's chief strategist, has been appointed to the National Security Council. Now, we've just heard Sean Spicer sort of defending that move and talking about the fact that it won't affect those who are already on the council, but certainly my contacts within intelligence and security here are very concerned by the elevation of a political appointee, and such a controversial political appointee, to the very heights of the American security structure. So a lot happening, a lot to discuss, and a lot that is still we're not getting a lot of explanation on these executive orders, and I think that's what people are seeking at the moment, detail.
Kylie Morris in Washington. Now, President Trump has alarmed environmentalists by appointing climate change deniers to key positions within his administration. Now, Myron Ebell, the man who was appointed by Trump to lead the transition team for the Environmental Protection Agency, is in London to meet like-minded climate change skeptics. Should we be worried? After all, one environmental group described Mr. Ebell as the greatest single threat to the survival of the planet. He's been speaking to our science editor, Tom Clark.
Keep calling it hacking. There's no.
If climate change denial has a face, it probably belongs to Myron Ebell.
They are cooking the data.
A prominent Washington lobbyist, he's been the bête noire of the green movement for years as an industry-funded champion of deregulation and climate skepticism. With increasing global consensus on the dangers of climate change and need for action, voices like Ebell's became heard less and less. But now, he's back. This is the man Donald Trump's transition team asked to overhaul the US green watchdog, the Environmental Protection Agency.
The enemies of freedom come in many guises, and one of the most insidious and dangerous in the modern world is the regulatory regime that we now suffer under. And a large part of that is due to the environmental movement, which in my view is the greatest threat to freedom and prosperity in the modern world.
Calmly spoken, grey suited, but check out the boots. In Donald Trump's DC swamp, he's a gunslinger. You want to bring skepticism about climate back to the UK?
I want to bring skepticism about the role of government in a lot of issues. I mean, I think there's too much government in the United States.
We're not talking about government here, we're talking about the fundamental issue of whether climate change is a problem worth doing something about urgently.
Yes, I think global warming is not a problem. It could become a problem. It certainly isn't a crisis, and it's very unlikely to become a crisis.
The Paris climate deal was evidence of how the views of climate skeptics have been marginalised over the last decade. But with Donald Trump appointing several to his cabinet and populist post-fact politics on the rise in Europe too, have those urging action on climate change got a new fight on their hands?
Politicians around the world now face a challenge of whether they're prepared to listen to the discredited arguments of climate change deniers who've been proven to be wrong about the science, wrong about the economics, and wrong about the politics of climate change. My bet is that in Europe and in the UK, they will stand firm and prefer to listen to scientists rather than ideological zealots like Myron Ebell.
You are, in many ways, the environmentalists in America, the Darth Vader to their rebellion.
Yes.
How does that make you feel? You're a public figure of hate.
It's silly. I mean, you know, I just do public policy and try to make the arguments that I think are correct, and will contribute to the public debate on these issues. I don't have a power base or huge funding.
It's true Mr. Ebell's think tank does have a fraction of the money of some large environmental groups and no longer enjoys the donations it used to from fossil fuel giants like ExxonMobil. But he's worked with the Trump administration and told us it would likely pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement and very soon move to allow oil and gas drilling on US federal land. What he's lobbied for years is starting to happen.
Justin. Vigils will be held in Quebec and Montreal this evening after last night's fatal shooting at a mosque which left 6 dead and another 8 people injured. The attack took place as people gathered for evening prayers at the Islamic Cultural Centre in Quebec City. Eyewitnesses said gunmen wearing black fired indiscriminately into the dozens of worshippers. The Canadian authorities are treating it as a terror attack. They've made 2 arrests, but say one of those held is considered as a witness. Diana Magny has this report.
The emergency calls came in just before 8 p.m. last night. Bullets fired inside the city's largest mosque, Quebec's Islamic Cultural Centre. It was during evening prayers in the men's section. 6 men were killed, 8 others wounded, 5 of them critically. 1 man arrested at the scene and another handing himself over to police shortly afterwards.
Close to 8:10, a second suspect called 911 and told us he was armed and what he'd done. He wanted to cooperate. He said he was on a bridge to the Ile d'Orléans on the side of the road.
Which is where he waited for close to 50 minutes in this Mitsubishi SUV till police arrived and arrested him. Police have refused to identify who the 2 men are, but they say that only one is a suspect, named in agency reports as university student Alexandre Bissonnette, though no word yet as to his motive. This mosque has come under attack before. In June last year, during Ramadan, a pig's head left wrapped as a present on the doorstep. This morning, the mosque issued this anguished statement. We were attacked in this cowardly fashion because we are Muslims, fired at close range because we are Muslims, killed because we are Muslims. Muslims targeted in a country whose Prime Minister prides himself on making immigrants feel welcome, responding to the US President's travel ban on Friday by making it clear that Canada was open to refugees. Not 48 hours later, an act of terror on Canadian soil.
The people who commit these acts mean to test our resolve and weaken our values. They aim to divide us, to sow discord and plant hatred. We will not close our minds. We will open our hearts.
A standing ovation for the Prime Minister, now en route to Quebec to meet the families of those who lost their lives as Canadians hold vigils across the country. In New York, police have stepped up security around the city's mosques. And just as other global leaders sent messages of sympathy, Donald Trump too called the Canadian Prime Minister today to offer his condolences as the reverberations of his executive order on refugees ricocheted around the world.
Diana Magni. Now here, 2 former bankers from the embattled bank HBOS have been found guilty in a £245 million fraud trial, alongside 4 other people. HBOS bankers Lyndon Schofield and Mark Dobson are among the first people to be convicted of crimes in the run-up to the great financial crash of 2008 that led to British taxpayers bailing out several top banks. Once Britain's biggest mortgage lender, HBOS was rescued in a state-engineered takeover by rival Lloyds banking group in 2008. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, is here. Siobhan, what's happened?
Well, John, as you say, this is all about bad behaviour inside the big mortgage lender HBOS in the run-up to the financial crisis, the years between 2003 and 2007. Now, at the centre of this scandal is the banker Lyndon Schofield. Now, he was responsible for looking after some of the bank's distressed business customers. But rather than do that, rather than help them, Schofield instead, it turns out, took bribes, money, luxury holidays, expensive gifts, sex with prostitutes, to pass those ailing businesses along to a restructuring firm called Quayside Corporate Services, which was in turn owned by his associates. Now, it gets more complicated here, bear with me. Rather than helping them, though, what happened was once they were inside that restructuring firm, Schofield would then lend them more of HBOS's money, ostensibly to help them, to turn them around, get them back on their feet again. But that's not what happened. Instead, his mates inside Quayside Corporate Restructuring Services charged these poor businesses exorbitant fees and siphoned off the cash. I think we can see here some of the spoils that those 4 executives inside Quayside Corporate Services enjoyed over the years: luxury cars, Mercedes, Land Rovers, large houses in the English countryside, huge estates you can see from inside Portugal, and swimming pools and tennis courts.
Why is this so significant?
Well, for starters, Thames Valley Police say this is one of the largest fraud investigations of its kind in the UK. It took them 6 years to get to the bottom of this, 500,000 documents. But the wider picture here, John, of course, as you well know, since the financial crisis, 10 years ago nearly, no single senior banker or CEO has ever been put in prison or charged or convicted with criminal conviction in all this time. One boss, inside HBOS, Peter Cummings, was banned from ever working inside financial services again and fined £500,000. And as we know, Sir Fred Goodwin was stripped of his knighthood. So here, finally, 8-9 years on, we have the first potential convictions of British bankers involved in that horrendous run-up to the great financial crash. Now, they've been convicted today. Just how long they will serve, we will find out on Friday.
But they will serve.
But they will serve.
Siobhan Kennedy. Now, the inquest into the 2015 terror attack on a beach resort in Tunisia has heard that a man lay dying in an ambulance for up to 20 minutes before it set off. James Maguire and his wife Anne were shot by the pool of their hotel in Sousse. Mr. Maguire was helped by Carol Harrison, a Scottish nurse who was also on holiday. She told the inquest that she asked several times for the ambulance to move before it did eventually set off. After the break, calling out racism, we talked to the singer, Jamelia, on her reaction to being publicly challenged over her presence with her daughter in a first-class railway carriage. She's got 4 Mobo Awards and 8 top 10 singles under her belt. As an R&B singer and a television presenter, Jamelia has been in the spotlight since the early 2000s. A fortnight ago, she said she faced scrutiny simply for sitting in a first-class carriage with her daughter on a train, despite having the right ticket. She said it was just one of many acts of prejudice reserved to her for being young and black. Well, she joins us now with her daughter, Tiani. Hi, Tiani.
Hi.
And Jamelia.
Hello.
Jamelia, just take us through what happened. I mean, I'm on this train with you. Well, I'm
Yes.
not. I'm just watching from the back.
I wish you
You're on
were.
a train to Birmingham.
Yes, so we left from London Euston. I just had a photo shoot and my daughter had come along with me for the day. We'd just sat down and a lady approaches us and she says, do you have a first-class ticket?
And she's not a railway official.
No, she wasn't. And in all honesty, I mean, my immediate thought was, here we go again. But I thought, let me give her the benefit of the doubt. So I said, why have you asked me that question? She then said, well, you know you won't be allowed to travel if you haven't got a first-class ticket. You won't be allowed to sit in this carriage. And at that point, I was just disappointed, and it was very clear the reasoning behind it. I wasn't the only parent on the train. I wasn't the only young person on the train in that carriage, and but we were the only black people in that carriage. And in all honesty, I tweeted about it more out of frustration, not because I wanted to take this stand. This was not a unique, isolated incident. This is something that has happened to me. My daughter has witnessed on many occasions.
Now, I think you challenged the woman, and she said, well, what did she say?
Well, she said that she wanted. She said that
She said she would ask any.
She would have asked anyone if she would have asked anyone if they were sat with her, and I was like, okay, and so we got up and moved. And when we moved, a white gentleman sat down in the same place, and he was unchallenged, which...
Tiani, you actually, I think you asked the woman whether she was going to ask him for his first-class ticket, is that right?
Yeah, because I thought my mum overreacted, but then when the man sat down, it was clear why she asked us, because at first I thought she was just asking us because we were sat with her, but then when we moved, she didn't ask the man, so I thought that was a bit rude of her.
Now, this is not a one-off, is it?
No, not at all. I think one of the things that concerned me, or surprised me, I should say, is the reaction to the tweets that I made. I was very surprised that people were surprised. These microaggressions happen on a daily basis, not just to me, but to thousands and thousands of people every single day. And what concerns me is the fact that so many people are unaware, and I guess my reason for speaking out about it, aside from being an example to my daughter, was that I want people to be aware. I want people to look out, and especially in times like this, we have to look out for each other. It's so important that we are aware that these things are happening and we have voices.
Give me an example of one of these other sorts of microaggressions?
I mean, there are so many. There are people touching my hair, or being stopped in my car, or being asked, being called aggressive, or being there are so many things. That the problem is the fact that these are normalities to us. These are not. These are things that this is just the way it is. This is how it is. But I don't want it to be like that for my daughters.
Inevitably, at a time when Brexit is in play, when Trump is in play, has it changed at all, or has it been consistently like this for a long time?
I mean, when it comes to microaggressions, I don't feel that has changed. We actually experienced a racist incident days after the whole Brexit thing happened, and that was shocking. Literally being shouted at with real racial insults in front of my daughter. My daughter, she was off school for 2 weeks because of that. And I mean, it's just very sad. We're British citizens, and I don't want to be having conversations with my 11-year-old about racism. I just want her to be a normal little girl. We were preparing to read Paddington Bear and talk about it on the train, and I just don't want to be having these conversations. And I'm urging people to be more aware.
Did you come down first class today?
Yes.
And it was all right?
Yes.
Well, I hope it's going to be all right going back. Thank you very, very much,
Thanks
Jamelia.
for having
And
us.
Tiani, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Well, now, let's return to Matt in Westminster. Matt.
Thanks, John. Well, tonight's main news. This programme has learned that the Prime Minister was briefed about President Trump's plan to ban travel from 7 predominantly Muslim countries during her visit to the White House last week. In the last hour, Theresa May has reiterated the invitation to Donald Trump to come up to the UK for a state visit. Listen.
The United States is a close ally of the United Kingdom. We work together across many areas of mutual interest, and we have that special relationship between us. I have issued that invitation, informally issued that invitation for a state visit for President Trump here to the United Kingdom, and that invitation stands. And in relation to the policies that have been announced by the United States, the UK takes a different approach. I was Home Secretary for 6 years. At no stage did I introduce those sorts of arrangements. So obviously, President Trump has been elected by the people of the United States. As the Taoiseach said, he is now moving to put into place what he had said that he would do. But we have a different approach to these matters in the UK.
Well, I'm joined now by one of the MPs taking part in tonight's demonstration, Mhairi Black from the SNP, and also with me is Mark Burns, an evangelical pastor who's been vocal in his support of Mr. Trump in the past. Welcome to you both. Mhairi Black, let me start with you. You just heard the Prime Minister perhaps reiterating her invitation to Donald Trump. The invitation stands. There will be a state visit by Donald Trump to this country, perhaps sometime in the summer. Your reaction?
To be honest, I'm incredibly disappointed and disgusted, actually, that is what our response has been. A state visit is one of the highest honours that you can give someone who visits this country. So to give it to a man, a misogynist, who has introduced a racist, xenophobic and Islamophobic policy is just absolutely ridiculous, and it's not the kind of country that I want to be living in.
And if he goes to Balmoral, which is a possibility, I mean, it's more remote than London, for your demonstrators perhaps, easier to police, what will the reaction be in Balmoral to him coming?
I think you'll find in Scotland, a wee protest every now and then, there'll be numbers out in their droves.
And just briefly, before I go to Pastor Burns, the fact that she apparently knew about this ban being imminent and then didn't say anything for 2 days.
Well, this seems to now be quite a habit for the Prime Minister. First of all, it was the Trident misfire that she knew about and didn't tell Parliament, and now it's this horrific policy that we're hearing that she already knew about. So I don't know why she's ducking her responsibilities and why she doesn't want to be held accountable.
But one could also say that she was unlucky with the timing, and having issued the invitation, she is in a bit of a bind. I mean, to now rescind this invitation would have extraordinary diplomatic consequences.
Extraordinary good diplomatic consequences, because it would be sending a clear signal out to the rest of the world. This is not what we're about, this is not okay, and we're not going to be honouring it.
So, Pastor Burns, you came here on holiday originally. Now you find yourself defending Donald Trump. I mean, there are thousands of people demonstrating up the road against your commander-in-chief, your president. 1.5 million people have signed an online petition saying he's not welcome. We don't want him to come on a state visit. I mean, does that hurt you at all?
Well, first, I think it's really important that we really clarify what this so-called Muslim ban, and it's not at all a Muslim ban. Let's be clear. Unfortunately, people are receiving false information, creating a false narrative that...
But it is a ban against Muslims from 7 predominantly Muslim countries.
It's not a ban against Muslims. We got to understand this, and I made this very clear, and the president has also made this very clear, that the United States is not at war with Muslims. The United States and other countries like Britain is at war with radical Islamic terrorists who are out to destroy the Western way of life. And we also got to remember that these 7 countries that is on this temporary halt was not created by Donald Trump. This was something that was already passed on to him by President Barack Obama.
But how does it make America safer if none of the people from those 7 countries that have been banned have actually taken part in any acts of terrorism against the United States? The people that did take part in acts of terror, most famously 9/11, came from Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and then it on the list.
Well, they call this a Muslim ban, but yet don't add all majority Muslim countries like Indonesia, like Dubai, like Pakistan, that is not on this list, but yet to call it a Muslim ban, it is preposterous. The fact of the matter is, this has been blown out of proportion because this is Donald Trump, who the world, through the eyes of media, sees as this racist, big, who's none of those things. I'm a black man from the Deep South. I know what real racism is, and it's most definitely not Donald Trump.
Mary Black, care to respond?
Yes, I just think you're incredibly naive if you think that this is not a racist policy. This is a man, one of the most powerful men in the world, who's effectively saying to predominantly Muslim countries, you are not welcome, you are being discriminated and not welcome in this country based on the fact of where you happen to have been born and what your religion happens to be.
Right,
that's just, how can you describe that as anything other than racist?
But unfortunately, you're giving, once again, false information. He is not saying you're not welcome, but we are saying that there's a temporary halt from people who are coming from countries, not people, from countries that have been proven, not just by Donald Trump, but by the last 5 presidents of the United States of America, that are suggesting from these countries there have been a compromise of radical Islamic terrorist activity. These areas, these territories have been compromised, and so what we're going to do is have a temporary halt. That's the key word. We're talking about temporary halt to allow the United States of America to identify which of these countries are the greatest threat.
Well, firstly, I would say there's no evidence whatsoever that it is simply a temporary ban. It's been put into place in a shameful
You're obviously not reading the executive orders.
I might be reading the alternative facts and not the proper ones then.
Yeah,
but
you're not.
I think the fact of the matter is that
before you speak, you got to...
Hold on.
Before you speak, though, you got to make sure...
Let her finish. The whole point is that this is one of the most powerful men in the world who is completely negating any moral, diplomatic responsibility to some of the most war-torn countries in the world. What about all the refugees that are fleeing the kind of terror that you just described there, that radical Islamic terror? You have shut your doors to them.
No, we have not shut the doors.
Stay in there. How is that a wise
we have not shut the
policy?
doors. What the government is simply saying is, again, this is not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is implementing this executive order, but this is already established. We didn't call President Barack Obama a racist. We didn't call President Barack Obama a racist when he halted a 6-month ban on refugees from Iraq, did we?
No.
We didn't call President Carter a terrorist. We didn't call President Carter a racist, a racist, or a misogynist, or someone who was hating people, when he also did the very same thing to those who are in Iran. But now Donald Trump has come on the scene, and you're speaking off of false information, but based off of the lenses of media. The fact of the matter is...
Can I just butt in just for a second? This is fascinating. Just one final question to you, Pastor Burns. How will Donald Trump, whose mother adored the Queen, whose wife adores the Queen, how will he feel when he turns up here with thousands and tens of thousands of people demonstrating against him?
Well, I really think it's important that, again, this whole conversation is based off of false information. Okay, the fact of the matter is, when you say racist and you call Donald Trump a racist, you're wrong already.
The right information is we run out of time. Pastor Burns, Mary Black, thank you very much indeed. We'll be back as usual at 7 tomorrow. But from now, that's Channel 4 News here from Westminster. Thanks for watching. Have a very good evening.